Hey, what is up, and welcome to Myth Monday here on Where All the Ladies At. I am Kim, and I am your host. I am a history nerd, a lover of everything mythical, and a novelist as well. And this is Monday's edition, like I said, so obviously we're focusing on myth. This month we have been covering Illyrian goddesses, and this is the last Illyrian goddess. So if you haven't watched the other episodes, and you don't know where Illyria is, we'll talk about that here, but I would say go back and watch the other episodes. Yeah, and all the rest of the stuff that I've got going on. There's some pretty cool stuff there. So, yeah, and also make sure to check out Thursday's episode as well, because it will be the last one in the series on warrior queens, and we're going to wrap it up with Kubaba, who was a queen that became a goddess. So, you know, you gotta be pretty badass to go from queen to goddess, right? And also, like I said, if you haven't seen the previous episodes, make sure you check them out. Last week we looked at Tamar of Georgia, and that's a very special thing to me, so hopefully you enjoyed that. Next month, I'm very excited to be celebrating Asian and Pacific Islander History Month. And once again, as I've said before, no matter if anybody says that these months aren't real, don't matter, are trying to erase, diversity, equity, and inclusion, that's not what I stand for here, and that's not what this podcast does. So we're going to continue to celebrate those cultures and ethnicities and the women in them that impacted the world. And I am super excited because I have some really cool ladies and cool goddesses coming up. I tried to, when I did the scheduling for it, I tried to bounce around to a couple different places and really look at maybe places that not everybody thinks about. So there's people from Vietnam, of course, I think I have a couple from Japan, China, Indonesia, a couple different places. So just kind of tried to mix it up, and not India, didn't only go to the part of Asia that everybody just focuses on. And as for goddesses, kind of the same thing. I kind of bounced around. There's some really cool things happening. So I'm super stoked to get that, but I'm also super stoked to get into this final Illyrian goddess, Thana. So before we do that, though, as usual, we got to do some housekeeping, shameless plugging. I'm sorry if you hear that. It sounds like somebody is building something. If you want to reach out to me, there's ways to do that through social media, through an email. If you're watching on YouTube, through the comments, you can do all that kind of stuff. You can also support the podcast. At the very least, I would really appreciate you guys liking, comment, sharing, doing all those things. The more you interact with the videos or the audio, the podcast itself, the more the algorithm picks it up and shoots it out to other people, which is pretty cool, and the best way that we can do to really build the community and get more people knowing about all these really cool ladies. If you want to financially do that, there's ways to do that too, through Buy Me a Coffee and Patreon. And as I've said before, coming up next month, there will be more on those channels as well. So might be worth it to go and look and maybe subscribe or check out some of the offerings that I have going there. If you want more on this goddess or anybody else I talk about and so much more, there's also a Medium publication. And if you are into magical, spiritual, mystical kind of stuff like that, wellness, life coaching, all that, check out my other podcast, Our Mystic Road Trip. It's kind of where I talk about all that kind of stuff. So if you're into that, you're welcome over there too. That is it for the shameless plugging and housekeeping. Now let's get into Thana, the Illyrian goddess of Huntress. A Huntress goddess? I don't know. Check it out. Alright guys, so if you haven't watched the other podcast or listened to the podcasts, You probably are thinking, where the heck is Illyria, right? There's nowhere in the world right now called Illyria. Well, that's true. There's nowhere in the world called the Byzantine Empire anymore, but it existed. Illyria is basically the Balkan areas. So modern day Albania, Croatia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Slovenia, that area. That is Illyria. Montenegro, parts of Serbia, that kind of thing, right? So basically between Italy and Greece, for those that aren't real familiar with that area. For those that are a little bit older, it would be the area that used to be Yugoslavia, or most of the area that used to be Yugoslavia. And so the Illyrians were a really distinct tribe that kind of ruled this area, and they really thrived between the 8th and 7th centuries. 8th century before Common Era, and then 7th century Common Era. And as a side note, guys, I know that there are some places where people still use BC and AD. I do not. I prefer to keep it unreligious, if that makes sense. And if you don't like that, I'm sorry, but that's just, once again, inclusion, right? All right, so yeah, they thrive between the 8th century BCE and the 7th century CE. They were really well known for their, hold on, I'm trying to get my notes to move on, even though I probably could do this by heart. They're really, really well known for their war culture. They were very powerful warriors, right? And they were in this unique area of the world where they had to put up with different empires and expansions at different times, right? So because of where they are, they had to deal with the Greeks, and they also had to look at the Romans, right? And both of these major cultures looked at the Illyrians as warriors. They respected them, right? They even sometimes feared them. On top of the military stuff, though, they were skilled seafarers. And if you haven't checked out Tuta, check her out, because she was a pirate queen, and she was Illyrian. And so they were really good, they really navigated the Adriatic Sea really well, and really was big on trade, exploration, and like I said, a little bit of piracy, of course. Coastal settlements really flourished for them, and the thing is that the Illyrians weren't it wasn't one group, right? It was a lot of little tribes that kind of combined together to be Illyrians. So some were more inland and they were much more horse driven, and some were on the coasts like in Montenegro and Croatia, and those would be more the seafaring ones, right? So they flourished so much, they became a super important trade hub, the ones on the Mediterranean and the Adriatic, right? And that hub helped connect the interior of the lands and also kept the Mediterranean kind of together, right? They also, on top of all that, though, they really had a very in-depth belief system. And much like the older cultures, most of the older cultures at least, it was very nature-based, which is why they had a god for this and a goddess for, we've talked about a goddess of storms and wind. We've talked about a goddess of fertility, which is kind of common. And this goddess is the goddess of, is basically the Huntress, kind of like an Artemis image, and these worship really played a big part. Now, this podcast solely focuses on the ladies, right? So when we do these things, I always want to look at what it was like for them in the culture, because oftentimes the culture either mirrors the myth or the myth mirrors the culture kind of idea, right? So women, here's the thing, before I get into this, in anything I say, what I would say is there's not a lot of written records by the Illyrians, right? And I've said this almost in every podcast. What the research that I looked at and found is going off of is, archaeological digs, of course, but also written fragments from both the Greeks and the Romans. So you have to take things with a little bit of a grain of salt and just kind of use conjecture. So women of the Illyrians had some freedoms and roles that were kind of rare in comparison to some other places, right? So unlike in Greece and Rome, women were, women in Greece and Rome, women were excluded from public life and decision making. It wasn't allowed. They apparently couldn't think back then. This is what I feel that they probably felt. But Illyrian women were actually pretty active in a lot of key aspects of society, and that included commerce and social gatherings. So there has been archaeological evidence that showed there had a role in economic affairs, especially the discovery of 1,800-year-old ivory tablets in the Albanian city of Durrës. Now, Albania is just above Greece, and they have beautiful coastline, and Durrës is one of the cities upon the coastline. So I'd imagine why, or close to the coastline. I don't know if it's right on the coastline, but it's definitely near the coastline. I'll have to look at the map. I didn't go to Durrës when I was there. I only went up the interior. So it would make sense that there was ivory there, right? The tablets contain inscriptions talking about women engaging in high-level financial transactions, and that really suggests that they held a pretty open and powerful place in economic and situations, and had some influence in those positions. The level of involvement, of course, that level would suggest that they had access to final independence and decision-making authority and all that kind of stuff. And this really meant that they were looking at a more equal position in society, right? Along with that, there has been some ancient writers, like I was talking about, that really recorded the social freedoms of the Illyrian, right? And like I said, unlike their Greek and Roman counterparts, Illyrian took activity in banquets alongside their husbands. They participated fully. They drank. They raised toasts. They engaged in conversations. Practices that in those other places would have been deemed kind of unacceptable for women because they were more restrictive, right? The thing is that this is a unique thing. But the more I do research on the cultures and empires that I'm doing on, the more I'm finding out that it's not as, as rare as most of us think, right? But there are certain cultures like the Illyrians that really embraced gender inclusivity, and allowed women to be strong. I'm sorry if you hear that. Illyrian women played an important role in shaping the strength and identity, right? So now we know a little bit about Illyrians and everything. We can go in and look at the goddess herself, right? So we're really, I'm going to take an in-depth look at Thana. She was actually labeled the goddess of the wild, but if you kind of look at her and you kind of take a little look at Artemis, there's probably going to be some similarities, right? Or Diana if you're looking at the Roman goddesses, right? So Thana had a couple other names. She was called Thana, Thana, or Zana in Albanian folklore. And she was a goddess associated with forests and hunting and the wilderness. She wasn't just the protector of nature. She was nature. She really embodied the wild aspects, the untamed spirit of the world, right? And she watched over animals and trees and rivers and anything that pretty much roamed through the land kind of freely. She wasn't a really soft and delicate goddess, She didn't sit on a throne and hand out blessings. She was fierce. She was independent. She was powerful. She was beauty and danger all in the same wrapping, which is really tantamount to what most of the cultures felt about nature, right? Because nature could be beautiful, right? Imagine sitting in an open forest clearing and looking at a stream running through, and there's beautiful animals and everything that's beautiful, but it also can be dangerous too, and so when you're looking at a goddess of the wild or goddess of the hunt, they have to have that aspect, right? It's that balance, that duality that so often that we're getting to learn so often appears in goddesses and the old cultures, right? So Thana's followers often depicted her alongside her 3 golden horned goats. So she had 3 goats that hung out with her, and they had golden horns, and every one of those goats represented something different. It was fertility, strength, and mystery, right? In the Albanian mountains, Thana they're known as Thana. Also kind of was pictured as kind of like a fairy-like figure, brave and beautiful, but strong, right? Not a passive forest spirit. She warrior goddess, and she really stood on that. Among the Bosnians, she was known as Thana or Thana, and she kind of took on a similar role, really appearing as kind of like this mystical being who helped warriors, right, offering them protection and wisdom, and sometimes even supernatural abilities. You know, her presence in these mythologies and different, because remember what I said, the Illyrians were a group, but there were a lot of individual tribes. So all of these tribes shared this goddess, right? So they added their own little touch on it. She was a force that really lived with the people who revered her, right? She inspired hunters and warriors and travels to really kind of embrace the wild, to respect its laws and understand the power that comes from it, but to exist with it in harmony. Now, one of my favorite things to do, and you guys all know this, right, is that I love archaeologists. Archaeologists are like, maybe that's why I loved Indiana Jones so much. Like, I just really love archaeologists. And the archaeologists have done a lot of work in this region, and they've uncovered some votive altars dedicated to Thana and her consort, I want to say is Vidasus. I hope that's how I'm saying it right. That were in places where the Illyrians used to roam, particularly in present-day Croatia and Bosnia-Herzegovina. These discoveries were kind of really valuable into the insight of what Thana meant to Illyrian religion, right? She was especially somebody super important between the Delmate, and that was one of the I think that's Delmate. I think that's how you say it. And that's one of the most prominent Illyrian tribes, right? The presence of these altars that these archaeologists found really shows that she was actively worshipped, because a lot of the mythical figures in this mythology maybe didn't have those definitive spaces, right? And it would make sense because the Illyrians were a fierce warrior tribes, right? So it would make sense that the goddess of the hunt would be someone who was a little more actively and religiously worshipped. Right? The pairing of Thana and Vidasus is kind of like and Vidasus was kind of like a god of like vegetation and renewal and fertility, and that's kind of looking at the combination between the wilderness and cultivated land, the untamed with the nurtured, that kind of thing, right? And this really shows that the Illyrians had this understanding of the balance and duality of their life, and how it was very important for them to stay in alignment with the harmony and balance of the world, So Thana herself, in Illyrian mythology, was, as I said, she was just simply the embodiment of the connection to the natural world, right? Through Thana, the Illyrians really kind of expressed their deep reverence and all that. Her presence, it wasn't just really about the worship, it was a lesson. Stories of Thana likely warned against arrogance and overreach, serving as moral guides, that kind of thing, And the thing is that I'm gonna preface this because we're jumping into the stories, right? I mentioned stories, so clearly we're going into story time. What I would like to say, like I have been saying, is that some of these mythologies and stuff that I'm talking about are a little less written down as, the popular ones, Greek, Egyptian, all those, right? So we all have stories and myths of those. This one is taking some of the features and factors and building a mythological story. So I do want to preface this by saying that this is not 100% authentic, but it is what I'm a writer, so it is what I would imagine if I was sitting around a fire at night with my tribe in Illyria at that time. This is one of the stories that I could imagine someone telling around the fire. So with that being said, let's jump into story time, all right? Grab your beverage of choice as usual, whether that's a cocktail or a cocoa. Grab a blanket and let's talk about Thana and the golden horned goats. In the ancient days, when the forest stretched endlessly and rivers ran untamed, there lived Thana, the wild goddess of the Illyrians. She was as fierce as the mountain winds and as graceful as the deer that drank from the silver streams. Wherever she walked, the earth thrived, and wherever she cast her gaze, the shadow of the forest whispered her name in awe. But Thana was never alone. Beside her roamed her 3 golden horned goats, creatures of both legend and power. Their horns gleamed with an otherworldly light, and it was said that they held the secret of the forest, the strength of the trees, the wisdom of the rivers, and the courage of the beasts. Anyone who dared steal even a single horn would gain great power, but only if they were worthy. One summer, when the sun baked the earth and the rivers ran low, a proud hunter named Illyria heard of the golden horned goats. He was a man of great skill, but also great arrogance. He had bested wolves with his bare hands and felled a stag with a single arrow, but his hunger for glory was never satisfied. The goats of Thana, he mused, sharpening the spear. If I can take one, I will be the greatest hunter in Illyria. Ignoring the warning of the elders who spoke of Thana's wrath and the sacredness of the wild, Illyria ventured into the heart of the forest. For days he tracked the goddess's trail, moving through thickets untouched by man, crossing rivers that shimmered with reflection of unseen spirits. The deeper he went, the quieter the world became, until even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then, one night, under the light of a swollen moon, he saw them, Thana's golden horned goats, grazing in a clearing. Their horns shone like captured sunlight, casting flickering patterns on the forest floor, and there, watching over them, was Thana herself, her dark hair flowing like the river, her eyes alight with something ancient and untamed. Illyria, emboldened by his own recklessness, readied his spear and crept forward. But the moment he stepped into the clearing, the air grew thick, the trees swayed, though there was no wind, and Thana turned her gaze upon him. Foolish hunter, she said, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000 storms. You enter my sacred woods, thinking you can take what is not yours? Illyria, desperate to prove himself, threw his spear. Before it could reach its mark, one of the golden horned goats stamped its hoof, and the spear turned to dust in midair. Thana stepped forward, her presence like the rising storm. You seek the strength of the wild, but you do not understand it. You think power is in taking, but true power is knowing when to kneel. Illyria's knees buckled beneath him, his breath stolen by the weight of her words. He begged forgiveness, but Thana only smiled, a knowing, wild smile. You wish to be one of the wild with the wild? So be it. With a wave of her hand, the night swirled around him, and when it cleared, Illyria was gone. In his place stood a black furred goat with a single golden streak running through its horns. From that night on, the people of his village left offering at the village forest's edge, whispering prayers to Thana and her golden horde companions. And deep within the wild, where only the brave dared wander, a lone black goat roamed, forever bound to the goddess he had dared to challenge. So that's kind of a story of Thana, not, a little bit of a lesson there, right? Don't go taking something that's not yours. Respect them. Thana's legend is kind of a really cool thing, and as I said, this was the last Illyrian goddess, so I'd love to hear from you guys what you guys thought about learning about Illyria, and maybe a little bit about that region of the world, a little bit about their history, and about their goddesses, and what you thought of each of the goddesses. That would be amazing. So leave some comments in the comment box, or if you're watching or listening, on the podcast, shoot me a message via my social media. I would love to chat with you guys and really hear what you're thinking. And if you have any suggestions on some people I should check out, that is it for this week, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Please remember to check out Thursday's episode. It is the last of the Warrior Queens for this month. I'm sure we'll visit Warrior Queens again. There's a lot more than you think there is. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed checking out Illyrian goddesses. And yeah, as usual, if you want to reach out to me, you can do that, like I said, through my social media, through commenting on this, whatever you can do. If you want to support the podcast, engage with the video if you're watching on YouTube. Engage, do all that kind of thing. 5-star me on Spotify. Whatever, all that engagement is definitely a great way to support the podcast. If you have a few dollars and you want to kick it my way, which I completely understand right now might be challenging, you can do that through my Buy Me a Coffee or my Patreon. If you want more on this goddess and so much more, you can check out the Medium publication. And if you're into magical, mystical, spiritual stuff, there's a link to my other podcast card, Our Mystic Road Trip, as well. So until next time, guys, as always, stay curious, stay blessed, stay safe.